It was a cold December morning when Mrs. Clark walked briskly into the classroom, clutching a stack of graded essays to her chest. The chill in the air seeped through the old school walls, and her breath formed small clouds as she exhaled. The heater in the corner sputtered but barely worked, and she wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. As she set the papers on her desk, her eyes scanned the room. Her students were already settling in, some laughing softly, some half asleep over their notebooks. But then her gaze stopped at the boy sitting by the window, Daniel Miller. He was quiet, always was. The kind of student teachers almost missed if they weren't paying attention. But Mrs. Clark noticed everything. She noticed how his jacket sleeves were frayed, how his shoes had holes so large she could see his mismatched socks. She noticed how he often skipped lunch, pretending he wasn't hungry, when she knew very well it was because he couldn't afford food. She also noticed how hard he worked. His essays were filled with deep thought, emotion, and maturity beyond his years. Every assignment came back neat, written in tiny, careful handwriting, as if he were afraid of wasting even a bit of paper. That morning, as snowflakes began to dance outside the frosted window, she made a silent promise: she was going to help him, somehow. During lunch, Mrs. Clark slipped quietly into the teacher's lounge, where a few of her colleagues were chatting over coffee. She opened her wallet. Inside were two $20 bills, all she had until payday. But she didn't hesitate. She folded one and tucked it into an envelope. That afternoon, she called Daniel to her desk after class. "Daniel, you've been doing very well lately," she said with a smile, trying to keep her voice light. "But I noticed you often stay behind after lessons. Is everything all right at home?" Daniel looked down at his hands. "Yes, ma'am," he murmured. "It's fine. I just like staying here. It's quiet." Mrs. Clark hesitated. She didn't want to embarrass him, but she couldn't ignore what she saw. "Daniel, if you ever need anything, books, food, clothes, you can tell me. That's what teachers are for." He nodded but didn't meet her eyes. She saw the way his lips trembled slightly, the way pride and gratitude fought silently inside him. She didn't press further. The next day, she asked him to deliver some papers to the office. While he was gone, she slipped the envelope into his backpack. Inside, she wrote a small note. "Greater than, for books or lunch. You deserve every chance to succeed, Mrs. C." When Daniel found the envelope that evening, he sat on the edge of his narrow bed and stared at it for a long time. No one had ever done something like that for him before. He could almost hear her warm voice, her kind smile in every word. That night, he cried quietly, not out of pity, but out of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Over the next few months, Mrs. Clark continued helping him in secret. When the snow turned to spring rain, she brought in an old but sturdy pair of shoes and pretended they were part of a classroom lost and found. When Daniel's grades began to rise, she offered him extra tutoring after school, praising him for his progress as if she hadn't noticed the exhaustion on his young face. Daniel began to bloom. His essays won district writing contests. His confidence grew, and slowly, his shy smile began to appear more often. But he never mentioned the envelope. He knew she had helped him, yet he also understood she didn't do it for thanks. She did it because she believed in him. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of grading papers, Mrs. Clark was preparing to leave when she found a small note on her desk. It was written on a torn piece of notebook paper. "Greater than, thank you for seeing me when no one else did. I'll make you proud one day, DM." She smiled softly and folded the note, placing it inside her drawer, where she kept her most precious things, her students' letters, old photos, and reminders of why she chose this path. Years passed. Daniel graduated with honors, his mother crying quietly in the back row of the auditorium. Mrs. Clark watched him cross the stage, his head held high, his future bright. When he turned and caught her eye, he mouthed a silent, "Thank you." She clapped harder than anyone. After graduation, life went on. Mrs. Clark taught new students, wrote new lesson plans, and aged gracefully within the walls of that same school. But sometimes, when she passed by Daniel's old seat by the window, she still remembered the boy who once sat there, quiet but determined, and she hoped wherever he was doing well. Daniel, meanwhile, carried her kindness like a flame that refused to go out. It guided him through college when the nights were long and the money was short. It whispered to him when he doubted himself, "You deserve every chance to succeed." He worked part-time jobs, studied relentlessly, and graduated from university with a degree in engineering. The day he got his first real job, he thought of Mrs. Clark. He wanted to write to her, to tell her how much she'd changed his life. But he stopped himself. Not yet, he thought. Not until he could truly repay her kindness, not with words, but with something she would never forget. And so, he waited. 10 years passed since the day he left her classroom. Life had changed for both of them, but fate had a quiet way of bringing stories full circle. One morning, Mrs. Clark received a letter in a neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside, there was an invitation, formal, embossed with gold lettering, to the grand opening of a new school in the city. At the bottom of the card, a handwritten note caught her eye. Greater than, for the woman who taught me to believe in myself. Please come, I have something to tell you, Daniel Miller. Her heart skipped a beat. She read the name again, tears already blurring her vision. She pressed the card to her chest, realizing that the quiet boy by the window had kept his promise after all. And deep inside, she knew, the kindness she once gave without expecting anything in return had finally found its way back home. The day of the invitation came faster than Mrs. Clark expected. She stood before her mirror, smoothing the wrinkles of her simple navy dress, her heart beating faster than it had in years. She wasn't used to grand events. Her life had always been chalk dust, lesson plans, and the soft hum of fluorescent classroom lights. But today was different. Today, she was going to see Daniel again, the quiet, hungry-eyed boy she once secretly helped. The car ride to the city was filled with a strange mix of nerves and joy. Outside, the skyline gleamed under the afternoon sun. She had never been to this part of town before. Tall glass buildings shimmered, people in expensive suits hurried along the sidewalks. It was a world far from the small public school she had dedicated her life to. When she arrived at the address written on the golden card, she gasped softly. Before her stood a newly built school, modern, bright, and alive with the laughter of children. A tall sign by the gate read, "The Daniel Miller Foundation School for Hope and Education." Her eyes filled with tears before she even stepped through the doors. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs, children smiling, classrooms filled with books, teachers working with care. Every corner reflected kindness and opportunity. It was everything she had ever wished the world could be for her students. A young assistant greeted her warmly. "Mrs. Clark, Mr. Miller has been waiting for you." She nodded, her voice lost somewhere between disbelief and emotion. The assistant led her down a hallway to a large auditorium where people had gathered for the opening ceremony. She sat quietly near the front, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Then she saw him, Daniel Miller, no longer the thin boy with worn shoes, but a confident man in a tailored suit. Yet when he smiled, she saw the same gentle kindness in his eyes, the same humble spark. He stepped to the microphone, and his voice echoed through the hall, calm and steady. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began. 10 years ago, I was just another student in a small town school. A kid who thought the world had already decided his fate. My family struggled, we often didn't know if we'd make it through the week. But one person, one teacher, saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Mrs. Clark's throat tightened. She didn't just teach me grammar and literature, he continued. She taught me compassion. She believed in me when I had nothing, no money, no confidence, no direction. She gave me more than food or shoes, she gave me hope. The crowd listened in silence. Daniel's voice softened. She never knew that her kindness would change everything. I carried her lessons with me through college, through every struggle and success. And today, I built this school, not for myself, but for every child like I once was. For those who need someone to believe in them. He paused, emotion trembling in his voice. And now, he said, looking toward the audience, I'd like to thank her in person. He stepped away from the podium, scanning the crowd. Mrs. Clark, he said softly, would you please join me on stage? The entire hall turned. Mrs. Clark froze in her seat, her breath catching in her chest. The assistant gently guided her up, and as she stood, the audience began to clap, a slow, rising wave of applause that filled the room. Her steps were unsteady as she approached the stage. Daniel met her halfway, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Without a word, he reached out and hugged her tightly. Thank you, he whispered. For everything. Mrs. Clark could barely speak. Oh, Daniel, look at you, she said, her voice trembling. I knew you'd do great things. I just didn't know how great. He smiled. You believed in me when I had nothing. Every book in this school, every child who walks through these doors, it's all because of you." The audience stood, applauding louder now. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. When the noise settled, Daniel turned back to the microphone. "I'd like to announce one more thing," he said. "This school will provide free education to underprivileged children, full meals, and scholarships for college. In the main hall, where we are standing right now, will forever be named after the teacher who taught me the meaning of compassion." He gestured to a covered plaque beside the stage. Together, he and Mrs. Clark pulled away the silk cloth. The golden letters gleamed under the light. "The Margaret Clark Hall of Inspiration." Gasps filled the room. Mrs. Clark brought a trembling hand to her mouth. Her eyes overflowed as Daniel placed an arm around her shoulders. She tried to speak, but all she managed was a whisper. "I don't deserve this." Daniel smiled. "You do. You deserve the world, Mrs. Clark. You changed my life, now you'll change countless others." The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Reporters took photos, children handed Mrs. Clark flowers, and Daniel introduced her to his staff, many of them former students he had helped through his foundation. She felt like she was walking in a dream. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, Daniel found Mrs. Clark sitting in one of the empty classrooms. She was looking around with a soft smile, her hand resting on a desk as though touching the past. "Do you know," she said quietly, "I used to imagine classrooms like this. Warm, full of books, where no child had to worry about being hungry." Daniel pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "You inspired it all. I just made it real." She looked at him with tearful pride. "I'm proud of you, Daniel. More than words can say." He smiled. "You know, I never forgot that envelope you left in my backpack. I kept it all these years. It reminded me that one small act of kindness can change everything." Mrs. Clark laughed softly through her tears. "It was just a little help." He shook his head. "No, it was hope. And hope is never little." They sat there for a long moment, teacher and student, mentor and man, bound by a silent understanding that life had come full circle. Before she left, Daniel handed her another envelope, just like the one from years ago. Inside was a letter and a small golden key. "This key opens my office," he said with a grin. "You'll find your name on the door. I want you to be part of this school, as our honorary advisor. The students need someone like you." "I still do." Her hand trembled as she held the key. "Daniel, I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," he said warmly. She did, and that night, as Mrs. Clark returned home, the city lights twinkled like 1,000 tiny promises. She felt lighter than she had in years. In her heart, she carried the knowledge that her life's work had bloomed in ways she never imagined. Meanwhile, Daniel stood outside the school, watching the stars above the building that bore her name. He thought of that freezing winter morning long ago, of the torn shoes and the envelope of hope. Now, 10 years later, the boy who once sat in the corner of her classroom had come back, not just to thank her, but to continue what she started. And from that night on, the school became more than a place of learning. It became a living testament to the power of kindness, a reminder that sometimes, one quiet act of compassion can echo through generations.